Dialogues are pretty important in multiple game genres, but mainly in RPGs. It allows you to quickly introduce players to the game world, tell the story, or kick off a few hour-long quest in your production. Because they might be so important in your game, I decided to create this detailed tutorial on how to make a complete dialogue system that can be easily modified to your needs. This video is split into 3 parts: designing and animating UI of the dialogues, scripting the whole system and triggering separate messages for different characters including NPCs on the map, and finally, the more advanced techniques and easier way to write the storyline. Remember to use video sections feature here on YouTube if you'd like to skip to the topic you're mostly interested in. Let's start by quickly creating a dialogue UI. Right-click in your project hierarchy and select UI Image. This will be the backdrop of our dialogue, so I will call it Dialog Box. Now take it to the bottom and resize it to fill almost the entire width of the screen. To make sure that it will be responsive no matter what is the resolution of your game, here in the Anchor presets, select the bottom stretch option. Now let's move on to the place for the actor avatar. I'm mainly inspired by the RPG Maker game engine dialogues, but remember that you can modify the position of it however you'd like. I'll create one more image component, and this time I'll call it Avatar. Please make sure that this newly created object is a parent of the previously created dialog box by just dragging it on top. To make it more distinguishable, I'll change the color of it to blue for now, and then I'll reposition it to the left side of the white box. To make sure that it will always stick to this side, here in the Anchor presets, I'll select middle left. That way, no matter how you resize the white box later on, it will stay on the same position. Finally, time for some text. Right-click on dialog box in hierarchy and select UI Text. This will be our actor name. Reposition it however you'd like, type name to see how it will look like, and make some changes to the text styling. In my case, I will change the font and make it a bit bigger. Same as with the avatar, I will also set the anchor to the left side. Then let's move on quickly to the message. Create new text, name it accordingly, resize to fill the entire box, paste in some example text to see how it will look like, and modify some text properties. This time in the Anchor presets we should select the middle stretch option. If everything has been set up correctly, you should be able to resize the dialog box horizontally, and all objects inside of it should be completely responsive to the changes. Time to start some scripting. We will be creating 2 scripts for this project. First will be our dialog box script that will handle opening dialog box and displaying the correct text. And the second one will be dialog trigger that will send a message to dialog box saying when to open and what messages to display. Let's start with the second one. As you can see, here on the scene I have 2 objects that will be able to open our dialog. For now on, we will work only with a button, but later on I will show you how to interact with NPC in your game. Click on our button, then select Add Component and create a new script called Dialog Trigger. Open it. As a reminder, this script will hold separate data for each NPC or button on the scene and will transfer all messages to a dialog box to show them on the screen when needed. In each dialog trigger, we'll store 2 types of information. First one, a list of messages that will be displayed in the hierarchic order. Each message will consist of a long message itself and the ID of the actor. Then there is also a second list of all actors taking part in this conversation. Each actor will store info about its name and avatar image. As you can see, messages and actors will be linked, so instead of typing actor 1 every time he speaks, we can simply type 0, which will automatically input actor name and actor avatar to the message. Let's code all of that step by step. First, we need to create a class that will store info about each message. At the very bottom of this file, type public class message, open brackets, and here define two fields that each message should consist of. So public int actor ID and public string message. Then let's create something very similar, but this time for the actor. Type public class actor, open brackets, public string name, and public sprite. Sprite variable allows you to link images from assets. In this case, it will be an avatar image of this actor. If you're a bit confused why we've created those classes, think about them as templates that we can reuse multiple times and fill them out with different data each time. To show them in action, let's create two arrays for our dialog trigger class and make them editable from the Unity inspector. Inside of our dialog trigger class, type public message array called messages and public actor array called actors. To finish things off for now and make everything editable in the inspector, we need to make both classes serializable. To do that, above each class we've just created, type system.serializable in the square brackets. Save the file and go back to Unity. In the dialog trigger script, you should now see these messages and actor fields. Because these are arrays, you can simply change the amount of messages to 4, for example, and that way you will see 4 separate elements. I'd like to fill out those fields with this conversation. So first I will type all message values. Then I will also create two actors, give them the name and avatar images. And finally, assign the correct actor for each message. Perfect. Let's also quickly take a look at our character under the button. Obviously, this NPC has a different name and different messages, but fear not, our dialog trigger is prepared for that. Just click Add Component, search for our newly created script, and add it. As you can see, all values are completely separate, and you can now fill them out however you'd like. Great! Now time to create a second script. Click on our dialog box game object, then Add Component, and create a new script called Dialog Manager. Open it. Here we first need to create variables that will link to the objects on the scene like texts and images. Type public image actor image, public text actor name, public text message text, and finally public rect transform background box, which will be used to animate our dialog box later on. Because we are using UI elements, we also need to type at the very top using unityengine.ui. Save it, go back to Unity, and quickly assign all objects to the corresponding fields by dragging them in. Actor image, both actor name and message text, and finally background box, which will be just a parent game object. Great. Now back to the script. We need 3 more variables that will store a message and the actors of the currently active dialog session. Same as in the trigger script, type message array called current messages and actor array called current actors. Finally, we'll also like to have a simple integer that will count messages progress. Type int active message equals 0. All of those variables do not need to be public because we will be accessing them only through the script, not in the inspector. Time to move on to the most exciting part, displaying messages. We need to have a method that will get messages and actors from dialog trigger and that will display the first message. Type public void open dialog, open parentheses, and here define what data we'd like to get. In our case, that will be a message array called messages and actor array called actors. Open brackets. Now simply assign those two values we are getting to the already existing ones. Type current messages equals messages and current actors equals actors. Let's also reset the active message variable by just typing ActiveMessage.0. Finally, to make sure that we have started the conversation, let's type debug.log, started conversation, loaded messages, and here type plus messages.length. That way, we'll get the number of messages to display. Remember that you can get source files for all my Unity tutorials by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description. Before testing that out in Unity, we also need to create a method in our dialog trigger script that will start the conversation. Type public void start dialog, open brackets, and here let's find our dialog manager by typing find object of type dialog manager dot, and here the name of our method to start conversation, so open dialog with messages and actors as the parameters. If you're familiar with using singletons in your Unity project, go ahead and go with that route instead. Okay, so that's it. We should have a working link between our dialog trigger and the dialog manager. Now in Unity, find our button, and here in the onClick event, click plus, drag in the dialog trigger script, and from this dropdown select dialog trigger, start dialog. Now simply press play and click on the button. In the console, you should see a message saying that the conversation has started and that it has 4 messages in it. The next step will be to display the first message on the UI. To do that, in our dialog manager script, let's create a new method called displayMessage. Here, we'd like to find out which message should be displayed. So type message to display equals current messages with the index of active message. That way, if the active message is set to 0, we'll get the first message from the array. Based on that, we can already set the text in the UI. So just type message text, that text equals message to display, that message. Then we'd like to get the currently speaking actor, so type actor to display equals current actors with the index of message to display, that actor ID. As you can see, we are doing the exact same thing I've told you at the very beginning. We are linking the actor ID with the list of actors to get its name and avatar image. Now let's assign those properties to the corresponding UI elements. Actor name, that text equals actor to display, that name, and actor image, that sprite equals actor to display, that sprite. Great. Finally, call displayMessage in the open dialog method to update the UI. Save it, switch back to Unity and press play. As you can see, after pressing a button, the first message pops out. That's great. Now time to create a simple way to progress to the next message. In our script, we need to create a new public void method called nextMessage. Here we firstly would like to update the active message variable, so let's quickly do it by typing active message ++. That will add 1 to it. Then we need to check if we are not going out of the bounds of the messages array. To do that, create a simple if statement that will check if the current active message variable is smaller than the length of the current messages array. If yes, we can update UI using our displayMessage script. If not, let's output debug.log, conversation ended. Now, how will we trigger this next message method? My idea is to use a space key to progress messages. Here in the update method, let's create a simple if statement that will check if spacebar is pressed. Type if input.getKeyDown, keycode.space, open brackets, and then run our next message method. Because checking for the space key all the time, even if the dialog box is not active, might be dangerous, we need to create one more variable that will tell us if the conversation is active. Here under the active message variable, type public static bool is active, which by default should be set to false. Then here, after opening the dialog, let's set isActive to true, and when the conversation ends, here in the next message method, let's set isActive to false. Finally, in the update method, apart from checking if the space has been pressed, we also need to check if the dialog is active. So here type double and symbol, and then the second check isActive double equals true. That should be it. Save the script and go back to Unity. Just before testing our game, let's make 2 changes. First, I would suggest selecting our button and changing the navigation setting from automatic to none. That way, we'll be sure that pressing space won't be recognized as a button press. Secondly, change the avatar image from blue to white. It was pretty helpful in the developing process, but now we'd like to see actors' avatars without the blue tint. After those changes, we can now test out everything. Start the game and press the button. Here, as expected, we can see the first message, and if I press space, you can see our second actor name and new line of the dialogue. Then we need to press space 3 more times, and that way we get to the end of the conversation, as you can see in the console. Pressing space at this point does not do anything, and the only way to have something updated at the bottom is to start a conversation once again. Now, as I promised you before, we'll work on the second dialogue trigger. Apart from our button, I can also use keyboard arrows to move this character. The idea is that if the character approaches our NPC, they will start the conversation. Let's start by showing you my setup. Both player and the NPC have rigid body and the box collider. As you can see, box collider for this character is much larger because we like to start the conversation from the further distance. Now, on this game object, you have already seen a dialogue trigger script with all messages and actors filled out. But we still need a way to trigger it. To do that, at the very bottom, I'll click Add Component and create a new script called NPC. Open it. First, we need to create a link between this script and the dialogue trigger. Type public dialogue trigger trigger. We'll link it using Unity Inspector in just a minute. Then we need to use a built-in method called onCollisionEnterToD that will be triggered when our player will come near enough to the NPC. If that happens, let's start dialogue. Just type trigger.startDialogue. Finally, to make sure that the player is only game object that can trigger this script, we need to create an closing if statement saying if collision.gameObject.compareTag player = true. Great, that's it. Now in Unity, drag a dialogue trigger into the trigger field and make sure that the player game object has the player tag on it. Now if I start the game and move our character using arrows, the dialogue starts when NPC is close enough. Here comes a small problem though. Notice that when I press space to go to the next message, our character jumps, which is not intended. Any input should be ignored until we end the conversation. Luckily, we can easily fix that. In the Dialog Manager script, we've created an isActive variable that tells us if there is any dialogue taking place at the moment. If I go to my character script, which handles all character movement, at the start of the update method, I can type if dialogmanager.isActive = true, then just return to stop executing movement logic for any frame when the dialog box is shown. Now, if I start the game, you can see that as soon as I approach the NPC character, my input stops and I can no longer jump or move until the conversation ends. That's great. That should be it for coding, but I think there is one other thing missing. Animations. So far, you've seen a dialog box staying on the screen no matter if the conversation is taking place or not, and without any nice transitions between messages. Let's fix that. My idea is to make the dialog box invisible at start, then we'll see a nice appearing animation, between messages a simple text appearing effect, and finally a closing animation of the entire dialog box. To easily animate the UI, I'll use the Lean Twin library that I already showed you in my previous video. As a recap, how to install it. Go to Unity Asset Store in your browser, search for Lean Twin and click Add to My Assets. Then in Unity, go to Window, Package Manager, and in My Assets find Lean Twin. Finally, just download and import it to your project. Lean Twin allows you to easily animate objects' properties using just a few lines of code. For example, I'd like this dialog box to have the scale of 0 by default, and then using script, I'll bring the scale of it back to 1. To do that, let's open Dialog Manager script once more, and here in the Open Dialog method, I'll type dialogbox.leanScale and pass in vector3.1 to indicate the final scale of the object, and then 0.5f to specify the animation duration. Because at the start of our game we'd like to have a dialog box closed, here in the start method I'll type dialogbox.transform.localScale equals vector3.0. Now let's test it out. I'll run the game, and already you might notice that we can't see the dialog box. When I approach the NPC, you can see a nice animation making our dialog box visible. In the script, let's also add one more animation when ending the conversation. Right here, type dialogbox.leanScale and pass in vector3.0 to make it invisible once more in 0.5 seconds. I'll also type set is in out expo to give both animations a smoother look. Let's test it out with our tweaks. Here is how the open dialog animation looks, and here is how it closes. Looks great in my opinion. The last missing puzzle will be the text animation. My idea is to fade in message text after each text change. That way, you will be able to clearly see that the message has been updated. To do that in the dialog manager script, I'll create a new void method called animate text color. Here we would firstly like to change the transparency of the text to fully invisible. There are multiple ways to do it, but since we are using cleantween, we can cheat a bit and type cleantween.textAlpha and as the first argument input which text we'd like to change, so message text.rectTransform. Then what transparency should be set, so in this case 0, and finally also 0, which will trigger everything instantly. Then go ahead and duplicate this line, but change first 0 to 1, which is the full transparency, and second 0 to 0.5f, which is half a second of animation time. Great! The only thing missing is to trigger animate text color at the end of the display message method. That's it! Let's finally test out our project with all of its features. First, I will press the button. That immediately opens the dialog box, and by pressing space, I can advance to the next message with subtle animation. Alternatively, I can also move my character to the right and start the conversation with the NPC with completely different messages and actors. Okay, so now after we've finished everything, the question is how we can continue from here. I think that the most important thing we're missing is the selection box like in other RPG games, where selecting different dialogue options can result in completely separate storylines. Here I quickly created a UI for that, but still we have a big problem. Our array is not really ready for multiple dialogue paths. Of course, you can create your own system to manage it, but there are already some solutions online that should help you with exactly that using a nice node editor. One of them is Conversa plugin that you can find on the Asset Store, link in the description. Basically, it allows you to create multiple conversation objects in assets and then greets you with this nice graphical interface. I can right-click anywhere to create new message, and very similarly as before, I just type in actor ID and then its message. I can then create another one, fill that in, and finally link everything together by just connecting each node. What's more, I can also create a choice node where our character has multiple options to choose. In this case, he will be able to select if he would like to take the quest, decline it, or maybe take it later. As you can see, each of those options also allow you to output different messages or even call other scripts. Obviously, to use this new plugin, I need to modify some aspects of the dialog trigger, which is pretty easy, and I also need to create a new method that will show choices to the player. Another important change will be that dialog trigger will no longer take a list of messages as the input, but will simply take this conversation object. On Patreon, you will find a separate project with all changes needed for Conversa plugin to work. Now, if I start the game and trigger our dialogue by approaching the NPC, you can see that we are following the conversation flow with the selection box working just as intended. I'm really curious, how will you implement your dialogues in the game? Drop a comment or join Coco Discord server and show us. Thanks a lot to my awesome patrons that support this channel, and as always, be sure to check out my other videos about Unity UI and Unity basics. See you soon!